President Yoon Suk Yeol holds a public briefing and a press conference to reaffirm his commitment to reforms of national policies, including the pension system, and to efforts aimed at strengthening cooperation with like-minded partners amid North Korea's nuclear threats. We have details on this edition of Issues and Insiders. Hello and welcome. It's Monday, September 2nd here in South Korea, and you're watching this month's first edition of Issues and Insiders. I'm Min Sunhee. We start this work week with a look at some of the stories related to the Peninsula making headlines here and elsewhere. For this, I have Andres Sanchez Braun, a correspondent for Spanish news agency EFE Spain. Andres, welcome back.
Thank you for having us here.
I also have Jacco Zwetsloot, host of NK News podcast. Jacco, as always, great to have you here.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Right. Andres, let's begin with your main takeaways from President Yoon Suk Yeol's public briefing as well as press conference that took place last week.
Yes, in this public briefing that took place last Thursday, President Yoon proposed increasing premiums especially for middle-aged and young workers in Korea. He proposed doing this at different paces. He also proposed a certain number of reforms, for example, a financial stability mechanism for the fund, and also mechanisms to guarantee better returns upon investments of the fund itself. Now, this all comes out after the National Pension Service showed this projection that tells us that by the year 2041, that's when the fund will first go on the red, or be on the red, and then by the year 2055, it would go completely bankrupt. Now, that is, of course, if nothing is done, if the current system remains in place. So this is also just natural because contribution rates in Korea are way lower than in other countries. They're around 9% of salaries in this case, which is almost half of what it is, for example, in Japan, and way below averages in the OECD, where it's around 15%. Then, of course, this entails that payouts in Korea are much lower too. Average payout here would be around 30.2%, I believe, 30.2%, which is much lower than the 50% that is the average in the OECD. Now, in Spain, which is also an OECD member and an advanced economy with a similar problem to Korea and to most advanced economies these days, which is very low birth rates. For example, the premiums in Spain are around 27%, much higher than in Korea, and this entails that the average payout is around 1,250 euros per month, which is around 1.8 million Korean won, which is more or less 60% of an average Spanish salary. So as you can see, higher contributions normally entail higher payouts, and this is what the government is kind of pursuing. It's just also natural because the system, for example, in Spain was put in place at the start of the early, the primitive version of it was established in the early 20th century, whereas the Korean one was started in 1988. It's not even 40 years old, so of course it's pretty reasonable that the Korean authorities are still trying to find a way to make it more profitable and at the same time try to unburden Korean people as much as possible. So all in all, a very hard challenge lying ahead for the Korean government and for all these advanced economies, guaranteeing that young people will actually ever receive their pensions.
Right. So apart from talk about reforming the national pension system, Jacco, President Yoon Suk Yeol during the press conference shared his commitment to cooperation with like-minded partners, including Japan and the US, amid their upcoming respective elections, of course. What exactly did he say, and what are your prospects with regard to the trilateral engagement after the respective elections in Japan and, of course, in the US?
Yes, President Yoon said with confidence that the trilateral security cooperation among Korea, the United States and Japan would continue even with leadership changes in the latter two countries because it's in the interest of all three of them. He also talked up the importance of such cooperation, not just for the Indo-Pacific region, but for the global economy and security. Now, will it remain on track? That's a big question. Of course, it could go either way, but not necessarily in the way that people think. First, we have to be careful to use the right words. This is not a three-way alliance. Both South Korea and Japan each have long-standing alliance relationships with the United States, but they do not have any such bilateral relationship with each other. So what this is a cooperative framework between the three countries that tries to benefit each of them at the same time. Now, I don't see Japan withdrawing quickly from such a framework, even after the Liberal Democratic Party selects a new leader and therefore a new Prime Minister this month. I'm unaware of any strong political factions within the LDP who are interested in abandoning or escaping from this current framework. Now to the United States, we've got the possibility of Donald Trump winning back the White House. Now, he's not opposed to alliances per se, but he's a transactional person. He wants to make sure that he and his side are receiving the better part of the deal, the most benefit, while paying the least cost. So if he and his security advisors can be convinced that this framework is a good deal for the US, then I think he'll likely keep it alive. And what I'm hearing in the media from some people who are close to his security team is that if the US will probably focus more on China, while pushing its allies, so Korea and Japan and other countries, to take care of other matters like deterring North Korea, for example. So for the United States, in a second Trump presidency, if it happened, the Trilateral framework is a way to get Korea and Japan to talk and work together on North Korea and China issues while the US is in the room. Now, if Kamala Harris wins the presidency, I don't expect there to be any change at all. So the real question is, what will happen here in South Korea in March 2027, when the next presidential election takes place, if the Min Sunhee Democratic Party were to get its candidate elected to the presidency, will that candidate keep the trilateral relationship going at the present level? Now, the progressive side of South Korean politics is traditionally quite antagonistic towards Japan and skeptical of any military or defense cooperation with Japan. So that is where I would be looking to find possibly a potential weak link in that triangle. However, that election, it's still more than 2 years away, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Right. In the meantime, Andres, with regard to neighboring Japan, President Yoon Suk Yeol also welcomed prospects of a final summit with his Japanese counterpart, Fumio Kishida, before the latter leaves office this month. What might the two leaders address, Andres, and why might this planned meeting be significant?
Well, apparently this meeting, it's highly likely that it will take place this coming week, this next Thursday and Friday, I'm hearing. Well, I think in this case, what would be important in the summit is more about the reassuring, and you know, Jacco pretty much summed it up very well on terms of the bilateral relationship. I don't think there is going to be any significant movement before 2027. That is when the next president of Korea will have to be elected, because as you all know, well, Kishida Fumio decided not to renew his post as a president of the ruling party of Japan, and tradition in Japan says that it's the president of either the ruling party or the party that can actually gather a majority in the Diet that will actually be posed as a candidate to be elected by this Diet as the prime minister. So whoever actually wins this upcoming election of the ruling party of Japan in September 27th will basically become the new prime minister. Now, as Jacco already said, there is no, or definitely, I've never heard of any faction within the LDP, which is a big party composed of many factions, some of them with strikingly different political views on all sorts of issues. But this is not one of them. I think every single one of them welcome a better relationship with South Korea, even though that entails, and that is something that in general the LDP likes, which it entails, the pushing aside all the crimes that the imperial government committed in Korea during the colonial period. So as I say, Yoon and Kishida have met, I believe, 11 times, including having met on the sidelines of different international forums. So I think this is a bit of a goodbye. And this is Kishida's visit to reassure whoever is coming after him will pretty much keep course in terms of improving relations on a bilateral level. Yeah.
Right. And moving forward, Jacco, a week prior to the President's public briefing and press conference, Seoul's Unification Minister Kim Yong-ho, he reaffirmed the risks of recognizing North Korea as a nuclear state. Could you fill us in a bit on this particular warning, its background, as well as, of course, its broader implications?
Yeah, the timing is interesting. It wasn't just a week prior to President Yoon's most recent press conference, but it was also a week after President Yoon's speech on Liberation Day, in which he introduced this new line on unification that focused on freedom. So Minister Kim Yong-ho said, quote, "If a situation occurs where North Korea's nuclear weapons are recognized, there's a very high possibility of a nuclear domino effect in this Northeast Asian region." Now, this domino effect that he's talking about, that's hinting at other countries also going nuclear, like South Korea, like Japan, and perhaps even Taiwan. So Minister Kim believes that the Global Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, would collapse and the situation around the world would become more unstable in terms of everyone trying to get nuclear weapons for themselves. So Minister Kim does paint a very bleak scenario, and his warning sounds quite frightening. Of course, we should mention that this is not a new scenario. This is one that's been talked about for decades, ever since North Korea's first nuclear test way back in 2006. So this is one of the main reasons why it is argued the world cannot give North Korean formal recognition as a nuclear power, because it may start that domino chain from falling. So while this belief in the domino theory of formal recognition has been around for a long time, the appetite for actually working towards North Korean denuclearization seems to have lessened a little bit, at least in the United States. The platform of neither the Democratic nor the Republican Party includes denuclearization as a US policy goal on North Korea for either of the two candidates standing for the White House. So that's perhaps one factor that has prompted Kim Yong-ho to give this warning at this time, that he would like to see the US be more vocal about coming back to that denuclearization aim. So the Yoon administration hopes that whoever wins the White House in November will stand firm on denuclearization of North Korea as a policy goal that must be achieved to avoid that domino chain from falling.
Right. And against the backdrop of that particular warning by Seoul's Unification Minister, Andres, there have been a number of media reports citing pundits speaking about accepting North Korea's nuclear weapons and focusing instead on discouraging it from further development as well as deployment. What more can you share with us?
Well, yeah, this is a vision that increasingly a number of experts are defending. The fact that, especially since the Hanoi summit in 2019, where there was failure to reach any agreement close to denuclearizing North Korea, what we've seen is basically North Korea more and more showing an increasing disinterest in engaging both Seoul, Washington, in terms of this dialogue. And we've seen it in the past year even, or the past 2 years, how North Korea has actually turned its nuclear policy into law, and how it's actually decided to engage countries like Russia, seizing the chance that Russia is engaged in the war in Ukraine. And it's basically shown no interest whatsoever in these discussions anymore. So it's more about sometimes thinking, the international community can try to shift its policies. Should we ask North Korea to denuclearize first? Should we put it forward, or should it be in the back burner to initiate dialogue? But I think at this point, what many are defending is the fact that North Korea has already made up its mind. Nuclear weapons seem to be going nowhere, and And as I say, it's interesting to know what the next administration in the U.S. is going to do. Some say that if Kamala Harris actually does win the presidency, her approach to things is more based on values than it is on practical thinking, if you want to call it that. And she might just continue what we've seen with the Biden administration, which has basically bore no fruits. Then once again, if it's Donald Trump becoming the president, then we have a higher instability factor that we've talked about before here. But then again, I think it's entirely up to North Korea at this point to decide if it's going to denuclearize or not. And they're definitely not showing any interest in denuclearizing right now.
Or even talking about denuclearizing.
Right.
This is
It's not
a quick way to stop a conversation with North Korea, is to say, hey, we'd like to talk about denuclearization.
And right, it's off the table for now. Jacco, also this month, a recent report by the New York Times says that the Biden administration has a new nuclear strategy. Now, this report itself prompted quick responses from North Korea and China. First, let's start off with that report. Do share with us Washington's latest shift in nuclear strategy.
Yes, you're right. The Biden administration has shifted its nuclear strategy to prioritize deterrence of China and China's expanding nuclear arsenal. China has been building more and more nuclear weapons and missile silos. So the size of China's nuclear arsenal is projected, I should say, to rival that of the United States and Russia within the next 10 years. So it is getting up there in terms of size. So this new approach from the White House, it's outlined in a classified document called Nuclear Employment Guidance. It's a funny sounding name. This highlights the need to prepare for a potential of coordinated nuclear challenges from China and Russia and North Korea, all at the same or similar time. So we're seeing an increase in military collaboration between Russia and China and Russia and North Korea, which adds another layer of complexity to what the US is doing to prepare for that. So, plus, of course, North Korea's own expanding of its nuclear capabilities, they're becoming more concerning as they're starting to rival the size of Pakistan and Israel's nuclear arsenal. So this change in strategy by the US marks a significant departure from past approaches, which mainly concentrated on Russia. And so it's emphasizing the urgency of addressing more intertwined nuclear threats in today's geopolitical landscape. So this update, it has significant implications for where we are here in the Korean Peninsula, because by prioritizing deterrence against China and acknowledging the potential for simultaneous threats from North Korea, China, and Russia, the US is signaling a more comprehensive approach to its own national security and to regional security. And that change reflects an understanding that North Korea's expanding nuclear capabilities cannot be viewed in isolation. They have to be viewed together as part of a bigger whole with China and Russia. Now, as you say, China reacted quite quickly. It made a statement through a spokesperson that urges the US to reduce its own nuclear arsenal and to abandon its Cold War mentality. And China wants the US to stop what they call extended nuclear deterrence, so protecting other countries with its own nuclear assets or expanding its nuclear alliance system. Meanwhile, North Korea's own foreign ministry had a spokesperson warning that the updated nuclear policy will have a negative impact on the security situation and the nuclear dismantlement system. So both of them very negative about that.
Right. And against this backdrop, Andres, do you suppose the world is looking ahead to a fresh nuclear weapons race?
Definitely. And I think we all should be very concerned about this. If you look at the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's latest report, it just shows that the number and types of nuclear weapons have increased in the world, and that the reliability of countries with nuclear arsenals, their reliability on these nuclear weapons for deterrence has grown too. This meaning the 9 nuclear powers basically have worked for the past year in updating and increasing their stockpiles. This means more nuclear weapons have been deployed in comparison to the previous year. You just pointed out, of course, the increase of China's arsenal, which of course is very interesting. But this is, I believe, not only we don't rely only on China. We need probably a larger responsibility from the big powers, from all of them. Because if you think about a country like North Korea, no major change in policy of this kind ever in history has come from such a small country. A country like the DPRK right now feels more secure because it's seeing basically that big powers are relying more and more on their nuclear arsenal. So, of course, they're just going to do the same thing. And I think also it's pretty important that these big powers not only act more responsibly in this sense, but also try to abide more by international law. Because right now, I think the bar is quite low. And that, of course, doesn't really set a good example for a country like North Korea.
Right. Jacco, do you believe a possible seventh nuclear test by North Korea around the time of the US election could perhaps work to shift the global narrative on dealing with North Korea's nuclear ambitions?
The seventh nuclear test. Well, let's recap for a moment. North Korea's number 4 nuclear test was on January the 6th, 2016, more or less 10 years after its very first nuclear test. The 5th one was 8 months later in September 2016. The 6th, and so far, the final nuclear test by North Korea was on September the 3rd, 2017. That means tomorrow, September the 3rd, 2024, it'll be exactly 7 years since North Korea's last nuclear destination. Now, North Korea watchers have spent much of the last 7 years wondering when will number 7 be, what it will mean, why it hasn't happened sooner. So we have to be very, very careful about any speculation about a number 7 nuclear test. That said, if we have a thought experiment and say, if there were a 7th nuclear test somewhere around the time of the US elections in early November, it might reinforce the perception that complete denuclearization of North Korea is increasingly unrealistic, especially if that test demonstrates some advancement in North Korea's nuclear capabilities. Overall, a 7th nuclear test could catalyze a significant rethinking of how the world chooses to engage with North Korea, shifting the focus from complete disarmament to managing a nuclear-armed state. But that's just a thought experiment. I don't want to be too firm on that.
Right, well, time will tell us then. All right, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. Jacco, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Andres, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow.